Happy New Year and welcome to your 2022 yearly horoscope. The way that I've structured these readings is in chronological order, which means it will be nice and easy to follow for you as I will be going through month by month from January through till December. Now, I strongly recommend that you grab a pen and a piece of paper because I have jam-packed these readings full of information. I also recommend that you find out the degree of your ascendant, sun, or moon sign, and the degree will fall somewhere from 0 degrees through till 29 degrees. If this is your sun sign, an easy way to figure this out is if you're born on the first day of the season, you will be 0 degrees in that sign. If you're born on the second day, you'll be 1 degrees, and so on and so forth. Now, before I get into your horoscopes today, I just wanted to say that if you watch your ascendant, sun, and moon sign horoscope for 2022, this will give you a more blended overview of what's to come. If you've just purchased the one, that's totally fine as well. So sit back, grab a beverage, and enjoy. Hi Virgo Sun, Moon and Risings. Welcome to your 2022 yearly horoscope. Before I get into your reading today, I just wanted to give you a bit of an overview of what the major focus will be for you in the year 2022. Given that we're going to have Jupiter re-entering Pisces, which means it will be transiting your 7th house, there will be an immense amount of focus for you on your personal relationships. And I anticipate that all Virgos will make some important new connections during 2022. Now, this may be a new romantic interest, or you may be meeting new clients and making new friends. The other highlight of the year will be the North Node entering the sign of Taurus in January, which means it will be transiting your 9th house. The 9th house is connected to education, travel, and your world beliefs. So you may be pursuing some new type of education, or you may be looking at international travel, and I'm sure that pretty much all Virgos are going to adopt a new set of world beliefs and a new way of seeing the world as it is. And so Virgo, I hope you enjoy this 2022 horoscope, and now let's get into your reading. January is going to be one of the most busy months of the whole year, and this actually goes for all 12 zodiac signs. But before I get into January, let's just rewind a little bit to see what was happening at the end of 2021. On the 19th of December last year, Venus stationed retrograde in the sign of Capricorn in your 5th house. Venus will actually be retrograde in Capricorn for almost the whole month of January until the 29th. So with Venus retrograde in your 5th house, some of you may be reconnecting with a former lover. Now, given that Venus rules over your 9th house, this person is likely to be of a different cultural background to you. It could be someone who you met while you were abroad, or perhaps they were visiting the country that you live in. Now, on a different level, this person could be someone who you used to study with. Maybe you went to college together or to university together. Maybe they were one of your university professors. On a different level though, with Venus being retrograde in your 5th house, which represents children in your horoscope, you may actually be reconsidering your stance on having children. If you had delayed having children, you may be revisiting this now. Maybe you said you weren't going to have any more children and now you are changing your mind on this decision. Or perhaps you said that you never wanted children and now you've changed your mind. Or the opposite of that could be true. Maybe you said you wanted children and now you're like, no, it's not for me. On a different level though, the 5th house in astrology represents our creative gifts and talents, and it also represents owning your own business. So if you do own your own business, with Venus ruling over your 2nd house of finances, you may actually have to refinance in order to invest more money into your business. Or maybe you're just looking at how you have structured your existing business and maybe you are making changes there. Maybe you're simply changing financiers. On a different level, you may be looking at what kind of resources are needed to invest into your business. Now, given that Venus rules over your 2nd house, which represents your taste, you may actually be changing the branding of your business. Maybe you're changing designers or logos or the entire aesthetic as it is. On a different level, the 2nd house represents naming things. So maybe you are actually changing the name of your business. Now, another way that this can play out is that with Venus ruling over your 9th house, you could actually be looking at getting a literary agent on board for a novel that you have written. The 5th house in astrology is connected to authorship. So you could have put together some kind of novel, book, maybe some short stories. Now, the 5th house doesn't just have to represent authorship, it also represents anything creative that we do. So maybe you are a photographer or a musician or a performer, and you're looking at getting an agent to manage you. Venus rules over the 9th house, and the 9th house represents coaching and tutoring. So maybe you're getting a singing coach, or maybe you are signing up for lessons with a tutor or with a mentor. The 9th house obviously represents education in all different forms, so it doesn't have to be one-on-one private tutoring. Maybe you are looking at re-enrolling into some kind of education program which is going to help you with owning your own business or with pursuing your artistic and creative talents. Now, on a different level, if you had started writing a book quite a long time ago, or if you used to be involved with certain artistic practices, or if you had some hobbies that you haven't really revisited in a long time, during this Venus retrograde period, you may be going back to these pursuits and to these hobbies. Now, lastly, the 5th house represents vacations and holidays. So if there was a vacation that you've been looking to take and that has been delayed many, many times over, you may finally get to go on this holiday. And I'm actually saying this for myself because I'm a Virgo moon, and there's this holiday that I've been trying to go on for literally 1 year. So I'm really hoping that that is me, but I'm obviously hoping that that is you guys as well. Now, on the 29th of December, we saw Jupiter re-enter the sign of Pisces, and it will be in Pisces until May 10th in 2022. So with Jupiter being in your 7th house, this can see you basically picking things up where you left off with a romantic partner. Obviously, there's a bit of an overlap with this theme given that we have Venus retrograde in the 5th house. Nonetheless, Jupiter first entered the sign of Pisces back around mid-May in 2021, and it stayed there until the end of July. So if you met someone during that period of time who you thought you could have a romantic relationship with, you may actually be picking up where you left off. Now, the 7th house doesn't just represent romance though. Perhaps you met someone who you thought would have been a good business partner or who you wanted to collaborate with, and the timing wasn't right. Now that Jupiter has re-entered your 7th house, which represents your one-on-one relationships, maybe you're now going to look at collaborating with this individual. Now, the 7th house represents your significant other or your spouse. So this could be a period of time where they are extremely busy, and they could become quite spiritual during this period of time as well. On a different level, when Jupiter transits your 7th house, this can actually see your partner physically putting on a bit of weight. Now, with Jupiter transiting your 7th house, another way that this could play out is that your partner may become pregnant during this period of time. Something to note with Jupiter being in your 7th house is that you're likely to make many new friends, or at the very least make some new business connections. The 7th house represents our one-to-one relationships, and it is also connected to one-to-one services and also sales and doing deals. So essentially, if you work in a service-based role, this can see you having heaps and heaps of new clients during this period of time. And given that Jupiter is going to re-enter the sign of Pisces, you may be looking at your client relationships or your business relationships that you commenced around mid-May through to July 2021, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. And lastly, with Jupiter in your 7th house, there can be a tremendous amount of focus on your time and on the services that you offer. I can tell you personally that when I had Jupiter transiting Pisces in my 7th house as a Virgo moon last year, I saw many, many new clients during this period of time, and my business really picked up. So that is something really positive that you can look forward to. Now, on the 14th of January, we're going to see Mercury station retrograde in the sign of Aquarius in your 6th house. Mercury is your natural ruler in astrology. astrology. So anytime Mercury is retrograde, this is when things just go kind of haywire. You get really, really busy. You start hearing from a lot of people. And basically, you receive calls and texts from pretty much everyone you've ever met in your life. So with Mercury being retrograde in your 6th house, which represents your work environment, there will be a lot of liaising with your colleagues, with your employees, or with your boss, and I'm sure you're going to have a lot of projects coming up during this period of time. Mercury also rules over your 10th house as well as your 1st house, which represents your career. So there will be a huge focus on work for you. If you have been out of the workforce for a while and you've been trying to re-enter it for a while, you can actually re-enter the workforce during this period of time. And if you were looking for a promotion, or if you had applied for a job, even if you're still currently employed, you may actually get a second chance here. Now, on a different level, for those of you who applied for a promotion or who applied for a job, and even if you are still working and you initially missed out on this opportunity, there may be a second chance for you here, or perhaps even a third chance. So if you applied for a job and you missed out, and then there's a notice going up saying we're looking for someone again, please put your hat in the ring, because you can absolutely be reconsidered for this role and be successful this time. Now, just be careful with your communications with your employees, with your co-workers, and with your boss, because when Mercury is retrograde, we can have miscommunications and disagreements with others, and this is especially the case when it is in our 6th house. Now, the 6th house in astrology also represents our health, and given that Mercury is your chart ruler, you may actually discover the root cause of some kind of health ailment that you have been experiencing, or perhaps you're going for a checkup or seeing a doctor who you've seen before in the past. Now, the 6th house represents the deadlines that we have for work, as does the 3rd house. Nonetheless, given that Mercury is retrograde in your 6th house here, if you have a deadline for work, you are unfortunately at risk of missing it. So make sure that you complete whatever work you need to do well in advance of this due date, because on one level, yes, you may just blatantly miss it because, you had a lapse in judgment and this is the most un-Virgo moment of your life. Or on a different level, the deadline may be brought forward. So this is why I'm saying you should absolutely try and complete work before it is due. And another way that this can play out is that you may have just misread the date. So if you thought that something was due on the 14th of February, for example, it may be due on the 14th of January. So you just want to double check all deadlines as well as appointments. And especially if you have doctor appointments or appointments with specialists or health practitioners, you are at risk of mixing these up, and on a different level, they may just be cancelled on you. Now, lastly, with Mercury being retrograde in your 6th house, you may be recommencing an old work project that you thought was done and dusted. So maybe you have noticed that there are issues with it, and now you need to go back to the project and, tweak some things and revise what you've already done. On a different level, though, your boss or even one of your co-workers may come to you and say, hey, we actually need to redo this project from scratch, or there's this big part of the project which needs to be revised. And it doesn't need to be a big revision per se, but it could just be a lot of little things which all add up. Now, the most exciting part of January will be when the North Node and the South Node change signs. So the North Node has been in Gemini and the South Node has been in Sagittarius for the last 18 months since May 2020. Come the 18th of January, the North Node is going to enter Taurus, which means it will be transiting your 9th house, and the South Node is going to enter Scorpio, which means it will be transiting your 3rd house. When the North Node is in an Earth sign, Virgo, this is really good for you because this is essentially trining your sign. So with the North Node being in your 9th house, this can see you being extremely hopeful for the future. The North Node represents having big ambitions and big goals, and the 9th house represents our vision for the future and seeing the bigger picture. The North Node is a very experimental energy, and it basically brings something new and something tangible to the house that it is transiting. The North Node is also known as Rahu in astrology, and Rahu shows where we can have a sudden rise in status. Given that the ninth house is already associated with influential individuals, a lot of you Virgos may somehow come into the spotlight or become famous or a well-known person. Now, with the North Node here in your ninth house, you may be well known for having a very progressive way of seeing the world. The ninth house is connected to religion, spirituality, mentorship, and it is also connected to philosophical beliefs and education. So you may become well known for some kind of progressive new teachings that you are delivering to the world. Now, on a different level, you may be well known for becoming a prominent figure in the spiritual community or in your religious community. Now, the ninth house represents the law. So you may actually have these big dreams or these big goals when it comes to making new laws and really making a splash in the political system. You may actually decide that you want to become a lawyer, or perhaps you are progressing from being a lawyer or a barrister, and now you're looking at becoming a judge or a justice. Now, for my fellow astrologers out there, you may actually become really well known or famous for some kind of astrological discovery or an astrological prediction that you make. So if you have your own platform when it comes to astrology, don't be shy to make some pretty out there predictions, because they may just come true, and then you may be well known in the astrological community for these predictions that you have made. Now, given that the ninth house represents your belief systems, maybe you were kind of interested in astrology, but you didn't really set much stock by it, and now you're like fully into astrology and you're embracing it with open arms. The ninth house represents our beliefs of all kinds. So maybe you're believing in things that you never used to consider even possible. Maybe you were super skeptical about certain things before. And an example of this could be your beliefs around aliens, your beliefs around outer space and space travel, or even your beliefs about God or higher forces. So if you were a total atheist, with the North Node entering the sign of Taurus and therefore being in your ninth house, maybe you're like, oh my God, I'm spiritual now, or I'm agnostic now, or I absolutely do believe in some kind of higher power. The ninth house is connected to seeing the bigger picture. Now, on a more literal sense, and yet somehow spiritual sense, the ninth house is connected to prophetic downloads, and it represents our ability to actually perceive the future. So with the North Node transiting your ninth house, you may develop some pretty amazing psychic powers or intuitive abilities. Now, of course, there's always two sides of the coin. So if we're looking at the downside of the North Node being in your ninth house, you may become a very influential person, or you may become famous for something that you feel that you don't deserve to be famous for this. So maybe you've made this groundbreaking discovery with astrology as an example, but then you're suffering from imposter syndrome and you're like, I'm not that good, like it was just a fluke, I don't even know how I got myself in this situation. But on a different level, the North Node represents where we can have a sudden rise in status. So whatever fame or whatever acknowledgement you receive for whatever it is that you are doing, even if you feel like you are undeserving of this, the North Node transiting your ninth house shows that you are worthy and that you will essentially fill these big shoes. Now, another downside to having the North Node in your ninth house is that you can become obsessed with religion. You can become obsessed with spirituality. You can become obsessed with trying to know the future. Now, when I say this, you may be quite fixated or obsessed with going to see astrologers or tarot readers, or you may become quite dependent on your own set of tarot cards or oracle cards, just as an example. Now, on a different level, you may become infamous for your world beliefs or for having some kind of progressive and scandalous beliefs or teachings that you are sharing with the world. And this is because Rahu, otherwise known as the North Node in astrology, was known for being very experimental and quite fond of exploring taboo subjects and topics. And because the ninth house is connected to preaching, you may actually become known as quite preachy by the people who you associate with. Now, on a different level, the ninth house represents freedom. So the North Node transiting your ninth house can see you becoming obsessed with the concept or with your notion of freedom and what it entails. Now, lastly, the North Node transiting your ninth house can actually show that you will enter into a marriage, and that is because the North Node brings something tangible to the house that it is transiting. So there may be a new marriage that takes place during this 18-month period, which once again is from the 18th of January through to mid-July. Now, with the South Node entering the sign of Scorpio and therefore transiting your third house, this can see you dissolving old friendships or business connections that have passed their expiration date. Now, obviously, this could be a positive thing or a negative thing. On one level, if you really haven't wanted to perpetuate this friendship, this is a great thing where you're like, good, now this has just fizzled out and I don't really need to worry about being friends with this person or maintaining this friendship anymore. Obviously, the downside would be if you weren't ready for a certain friendship or relationship to end. But on a different level, the third house represents your perspective and how you see the world. And the South Node, which is also known as Ketu in astrology, is a very spiritual energy. So the South Node transiting your third house can actually see you dissolving a pessimistic outlook on life, and you may adopt a new spiritual way of seeing the world. Now, Ketu in astrology is representative of perfecting something or mastering something. So during this 18-month period, you may actually master the art of writing or a new skill or a new talent, and this is represented by the third house. So you may actually finish some kind of education course, you may finish an apprenticeship, and now you are considered to be at a certain level with regard to this new skill or this new education program. Maybe you're now fully qualified as a tradesperson, just as an example. Now, the third house represents our daily commute. So if you have had to do a crazy amount of travel for your work with the South Node transiting Scorpio in your third house, over the course of this 18-month period, you may have to travel less and less for work, which would obviously be a positive thing for you, unless it's a negative thing for you. Obviously, this is a general reading, so, on one level, you may love the travel, you may love going on little excursions for work, but on a different level, maybe you're sick of taking the train 2 hours back and forth every day. Now, another downside of having the South Node transit your third house is that you can become overly perfectionistic with things. And this is because the South Node has this desire to make something perfect and to master it. So if you are a writer, if you are taking a course, if you have to sit certain exams or tests, the South Node here can make you overly perfectionistic when it comes to, making something 100%. And this can be to the detriment of you actually appreciating when you've done a good job. If you get 99% in a test, Virgo, this is good. Don't focus on the 1%. And I'm saying this to myself as much as I say this to you because, as you know, I'm a Virgo moon and I definitely do this myself. Now, on the 25th of January, Mercury is going to retrograde from Aquarius back into the sign of Capricorn, which means that it will be in your 5th house. With Mercury retrograde in your 5th house, there will be a big focus for you on your romantic relationships or on your children or on whether you should be starting a family or not. Now, the 5th house represents owning your own business and your creative gifts and hobbies and talents. So if you're not necessarily focused on your romantic relationships or on your children, you may just be looking at reopening your business, making changes to the business that you do have. You may be picking an old hobby back up that you used to love, or perhaps you are rejoining a sporting team. Now, lastly, the 5th house represents authorship and writing a book. So if you had started writing a novel or a book, or if you had started some kind of creative project, this can see you revisiting that and picking up where you left off. Now, on the 3rd of February, your ruling planet Mercury will station direct in the sign of Capricorn in your 5th house. So this can see things finally starting to calm down with regard to your romantic relationship, your dating life, your relationship with your children, your hobbies, your passions, and I'm sure many of you will come out the other side of this Mercury retrograde period and have a totally different set of beliefs when it comes to your romantic partnership and your creative process and your creative projects. The Mercury post-shadow retrograde period will last for 2 weeks though, so after the 17th of February, things will well and truly be back to normal, until May when we see our next Mercury retrograde period. Now on the 2nd of March, Venus is going to be out of the post-retrograde shadow period. Then on the 6th of March, we're going to see Venus and Mars both entering the sign of Aquarius, which means that they will be transiting your 6th house. Your 6th house represents your work, and it also represents your boss and your employees. So there will be a huge focus on your relationships with anyone that you work with, and some of you may be looking to start your own business during this period of time, and that is indicated by the fact that Mars rules over your 3rd house, which represents self-made worth. Now, the 6th house represents your health, and Venus rules over your 2nd house, which represents your diet. So you may be making some very significant changes to not only your workout regime, but also your diet and what your eating habits are like throughout the day. Now, lastly, with Venus and Mars being in your 6th house, there could just be a very big focus on some new work projects that you may be starting. Now on the 3rd and 4th of April, we are going to see the Sun being exalted in the sign of Aries, while the Moon will be exalted in the sign of Taurus. This only happens once a year during Aries season. Now, Aries season represents the start of the astrological year because it is the first sign of the zodiac. So essentially the 3rd and the 4th of April, with the Sun and the Moon being exalted here, will actually have this sort of like New Year's Day energy. So if you think about what you normally do on January 1st, you can essentially treat this as a second shot of starting the year afresh. Now on the 12th of April, we are going to see the Jupiter and Neptune conjunction at 23 degrees in the sign of Pisces. Jupiter and Neptune only form this conjunction about once every 13 years, and we will not see this happen again in our lifetime in the sign of Pisces. Now, because this is occurring in your 7th house, this will have such a huge impact on all Virgos. But the Virgos that will be the most impacted by this conjunction will be those who have their Sun, Moon, or Rising at 23 degrees. Now, I'll extend that a little bit further. For Virgo Suns and Risings, if your Sun or Rising is anywhere from 19 degrees through till 27 degrees, this will still impact you very strongly. For my Virgo moons, this will impact you a lot if your Virgo moon falls anywhere between 15 degrees and 29 degrees. Now, in terms of how this conjunction will impact you, well, given that this is occurring in your 7th house, which represents collaborations, partnerships, and alliances, this will definitely indicate that your personal relationships will be impacted. So for some of you, you may actually form a committed romantic relationship with another person. Now, in terms of what this individual may be like, well, they could be a Pisces or Sagittarius Sun, Moon, or Rising, or they could be a musician, an artist, a teacher. They could be of a different cultural background to you, or on a different level, they could just be an extremely spiritual person. Now, this can see your existing relationships receiving some kind of healing or blessing. So if you're already in a committed relationship, there may be some powerful new beginning taking place in the life of your significant other. Perhaps they are actually falling pregnant with this particular conjunction, or they could be having a spiritual awakening. Now, if you have a fractured relationship with another person, whether this is your significant other, your friend, a client, a business partner, or even your second born child, you may actually have an opportunity here to heal that relationship with this individual. Now, on a different level, if you have some emotional wounds from a past relationship that has ended, or this could be from a former marriage, you can actually finally heal and move on from the damage that was done to you emotionally speaking in this relationship. Now, you may actually have an opportunity to collaborate with someone who is very well known in the public eye. Now, this opportunity with regard to your career could actually pertain to something musical or artistic in nature. And that is because Neptune represents music, and Neptune also represents artistic and creative abilities. So this could actually see you being seen by many people and somehow being in the spotlight for what you bring to the table with regard to your creative gifts and talents. Now, because Jupiter represents knowledge and wisdom and Neptune represents spirituality, you may actually become well known for your spiritual teachings. And on a different level, this conjunction in your 7th house can see you having an opportunity to help the collective, and that is because the 7th house represents the audience in astrology and Neptune represents the collective. And this conjunction between Jupiter and Neptune shows that you have this amazing ability to help heal others on a very deep level, and that whatever you do to help people, this could have a very far-reaching effect. Now, when I say helping people, this could be through your contribution via the arts or the music industry. So maybe you're an actor or an actress, maybe you are a poet or a writer, or perhaps you've created a beautiful piece of art, and somehow whatever creative work you have produced, it can reach a large group of people and help to heal them on a deep spiritual and emotional level. In any case, I do see this as being a very exciting conjunction, and of course some of you may be well known for your spiritual beliefs and for your spiritual teachings. After all, Jupiter does represent being a teacher or some kind of mentor. Now, on the 30th of April, we are going to see a new moon solar eclipse take place at 10 degrees in the sign of Taurus, and this will be occurring in your 9th house. Whenever we are analyzing eclipses or even new moons and full moons, we really have to look at what the ruler of that eclipse is doing. So given that this eclipse is occurring in Taurus, the ruler of it will be Venus. Now, Venus will actually be at 27 degrees in Pisces, and it will be conjunct Jupiter. In fact, they will be just 1 minute apart. This new moon solar eclipse is going to be making a trine to Mars in Pisces at 11 degrees. And lastly, we're actually going to have Neptune in Pisces at 24 degrees as well. So obviously there is a stellium occurring in the sign of Pisces in your 7th house. So this will have such a huge impact on you, because not only is your 7th house of one-on-one relationships activated, but this new moon solar eclipse is making a trine to you as a Virgo Sun, Moon or Rising. So new moon eclipses bring about some kind of new chapter in our lives. Now, given that this is occurring in your 9th house, this can affect you in one or more of the following ways. This could be on the education front, on the travel front. Now, this can also be about your spiritual beliefs or your world beliefs. So let's break this down a little bit further. Some of you Virgos may be taking up a new post as a teacher, and this is indicated by the fact that the ruler of this eclipse will be conjunct Jupiter. Now, another way that this can play out is that you may be accepted into a new education program, or you may actually be welcoming a new teacher, mentor, or advisor into your life. The 9th house represents mentors, tutors, spiritual advisors, and counselors. So obviously this could go either way, where you may be the mentor or you may be the mentee. In any case, this new moon solar eclipse occurring in your 9th house indicates that there will be some kind of new spiritual awakening that is occurring for you. And this will certainly impact your one-on-one relationships as indicated by this stellium of planets in your 7th house. Now, on a different level, the 9th house represents travel. So there may actually be an opportunity here for you to travel abroad. Now, the 9th house is connected to marriage, and so is the planet Jupiter. So some of you may actually be getting married around this particular date, which once again is the 30th of April. It is important to note though that eclipse energy can see us feeling quite lethargic or quite sensitive and overly emotional. Now, you may be experiencing these energies about 4 weeks before the eclipse. So this would be from the very beginning of April. In any case, I actually see this eclipse as bringing something really positive to your life. Something to note though is that Neptune represents making a sacrifice, and Pisces itself is associated with sacrifice and surrendering something. So in order to welcome this new opportunity in your life, you may actually have to make a sacrifice when it comes to one or more of your personal relationships. So this can look like, not putting as much time into certain relationships so that you can pursue a travel opportunity or an education opportunity or a career opportunity. Or maybe these opportunities mean that you need to take a little bit of time out from your committed romantic relationship. Now, I'm not saying that you're going to go on a break with your partner. It may just be that in order for you to focus on you and your future, you may need to physically put a bit of distance between you and your significant other to pursue this new exciting opportunity that is starting in your life. Lastly, with this new moon eclipse, like I said, the 9th house represents your world beliefs. So this pertains to your spiritual beliefs, your religious beliefs, and literally your perspective of the world and how you see your future playing out. So this new moon solar eclipse can basically bring you some kind of prophetic download when it comes to knowing what you want to do with your life and what direction you want to go in. Now, on the 10th of May, Mercury is going to station retrograde in the sign of Gemini, which means it will be transiting your 10th house. Now, it's actually going to spend a couple of weeks in Gemini before it retrogrades back into Taurus. But while it is retrograde in your 10th house, this can see you rethinking and reevaluating everything when it comes to your career, your higher calling, and your life purpose. So given that Mercury is your chart ruler and it rules over your 1st house as well as your 10th house, you may be rethinking the job that you are in, the industry that you are in, the position that you have, the responsibilities that you have. And you may be asking a lot of questions like, do I like what I'm doing? How can I improve it? How can I take the next step in my career? How can I transition out of one job and into another, or transition out of one industry into another? Now, for those of you who have been seeking employment for a long time and have been thus far unsuccessful, this can actually see you re-entering the workforce. On a different level, for those of you who are retired, you may actually decide to come out of retirement during this period of time. Now, with Mercury being retrograde in your 10th house, this can actually affect how you identify in the public. So you may be making some big changes with regard to how you want to be known. Now, this can be as simple as an actual name change. So if you don't like your name, maybe you're going out and legally changing it to something else. Or you could be identifying as a different name. Now, the 10th house is connected to positions of leadership and our life calling. So you may actually go on a bit of a course correcting mission here. And I imagine that this will be a flow-on effect from the new moon solar eclipse that we saw just 10 days earlier. Now, another way that Mercury retrograde in the 10th house can play out is that we may be wanting to change up how we are seen in the public eye. And because Mercury rules over your 1st house, which represents how you present yourself, this can see you dressing differently, getting a makeover. This can see you, basically carrying yourself in a totally different way. And I'm sure that many people will be taking notice of these changes that you are making because they will be quite obvious. Now, also on the 10th of May, we are going to see Jupiter enter the sign of Aries for the first time in about 13 years. So it is going to transit your 8th house. Jupiter in the 8th house can essentially lead to you seeing a big increase in your mutual resources. And this is because Jupiter expands whatever it touches. So if you are in a committed relationship, this can actually see your partner receiving some kind of large pay rise, or they could be receiving money from their family. Now, given that Jupiter rules over your 4th house and that it rules over your 7th house, you may be receiving money from your family. You could be receiving money from properties that have been sold. Now, it doesn't necessarily need to be from your family, but if you have sold a property, you may actually receive money from that settlement, around the 10th of May or even through till the end of July. Now, on a different level, with Jupiter being in your 8th house, this can see you receiving more money from the client services that you offer or from the business deals that you do. And this is indicated by the fact that Jupiter rules over your 7th house, which represents your clients and sales and deals that you make. Now, the 8th house is very psychological in nature. So this can see you experiencing some kind of profound healing on a deep psychological level. And you may be looking at seeing a therapist or a psychologist during this time, and you could very well have a big breakthrough if you do so. And this is indicated by the fact that Jupiter rules over your 4th house, which represents your family life and your childhood. So if you have certain experiences from your childhood that you carry with you and that have manifested as these deep-seated psychological issues or self-limiting behaviors or even fears, this can see you having a big breakthrough in that department. Now, you can certainly receive some very life-changing advice from not just a psychologist, but it could actually be from an astrologer or a tarot reader or someone who offers some kind of occult or spiritual service. And that is because the 8th house is connected to anything which is mystical, magical, occult, spiritual, and esoteric in nature. Now, on the 16th of May, there's going to be a total lunar eclipse at 25 degrees in Scorpio in your 3rd house. This lunar eclipse is going to be making an almost exact square to Saturn in Aquarius in your 6th house, and it's also going to be making a trine to Neptune and Mars in Pisces. And of course, Mars is the ruler of the eclipse, so this is a very beneficial aspect to have in an eclipse. But let's break it down a little bit. Total lunar eclipses represent a very powerful ending of a chapter taking place somewhere in our lives. So because this is occurring in your 3rd house, I expect that many of you Virgos will be wrapping up some kind of project that you have been working on, which has taken a lot out of you. Okay, the 3rd house represents work projects and working in small teams, but it also represents education courses. And maybe some of you have had this really long drawn out experience with a work project or with something that you are studying. Now, because it is making a square to Saturn in your 6th house, you do really need to be careful about your health during this period of time. And I'm certainly not saying that to scare any of you Virgos. Essentially, though, the 6th house represents our health, and squares to Saturn can indicate there being some kind of, breakdown due to overuse. Okay, so if you're working yourself way too hard, unfortunately, you are likely to feel the effects during this eclipse. So please make sure that you are taking care of yourself. On a positive note though, this eclipse making a trine to Mars and Neptune in your 7th house indicates that on one level, you may be receiving some much needed help and assistance from another individual with, maybe a work project or taking a test or your studies, or perhaps you're finishing up an apprenticeship. Or on a different level though, if you have been in some kind of difficult relationship with another person, perhaps this is someone at school or someone that you're working on on a project with, or this may even be with your sibling or with a relative, this can show there being some kind of healing that takes place within that relationship. Or perhaps you're finding the courage to let go of your dependence on this other person. Now, the third house represents having courage, and it also represents self-made worth. So perhaps there is some kind of new business that you've launched, or maybe you've built a website or an app, or you've put together some kind of new technological system which involves working with other people, or the internet, or some kind of equipment, or like I said, it could be to do with technology. And now that it is finished, you can, release this out to the public, and you may actually land some kind of lucrative deal as a result. In any case, I do see this total lunar eclipse as being some kind of liberation or release from a burdensome contract or obligation, or even from a relationship. So in terms of, feeling the eclipse energy like what we discussed in April, well, you'll certainly be feeling the effects from the beginning of April through till around, I would say, the end of May. Now, lastly, in May, we're going to see Mercury retrograding from Gemini back into the sign of Taurus, which means that it will be in your 9th house. So this can see you revisiting plans to travel abroad. If your wedding was delayed, it may be back on and you can proceed with your plans. You may be revisiting certain studies, and you may be seeing a tutor once more, or you may be reestablishing your relationship with a mentor figure, or you could even be reconnecting with your father. Lastly, with Mercury being retrograde in your 9th house, you may simply be revising your entire set of beliefs when it comes to how you perceive the world, when it comes to what you believe in with your religious ideologies, your spiritual ideologies, and your philosophical beliefs, and maybe even your political beliefs. On the 3rd of June, Mercury will station direct in the sign of Taurus in your 9th house. Just remember, Virgo, that there will always be a 2-week post-shadow period after Mercury is retrograde, so things will well and truly come down for you at about mid-month. Now, on the 22nd of July, we are going to see Leo season commence, and this will be significant for you Virgo Suns specifically, and that is because every time we experience the zodiac season that precedes our sun sign season, we can feel a little bit lethargic, and we may be more susceptible to falling ill. So just make sure that from the 22nd of July through till around the 22nd of August, before Virgo season starts, that you Virgo Suns in particular are taking good care of yourselves. Now, on the 28th of July, we're going to see Jupiter station retrograde in the sign of Aries in your 8th house. So Jupiter is actually retrograde for 5 months of every year. It's not too much of a big deal. Having said that though, when it is retrograde in our 8th house, there may be some kind of hiccup that takes place with our partner's finances or with our business partner's finances. When Jupiter is retrograde in the 8th house, this is actually a great opportunity for you to become more introspective and study your astrological birth chart. You may be looking at getting tarot readings done and astrology readings. And essentially, when Jupiter is retrograde in the 8th house, we can have more of a psychological breakthrough. So I would certainly be making that the primary focus for you until Jupiter retrogrades back into Pisces at the end of October. On the 31st of July, we are going to see the North Node and Uranus conjunction at 18 degrees in the sign of Taurus. Now, Mars will also be in the mix here because it will be at 17 degrees Taurus. So with this occurring in your 9th house, there will be some kind of big change when it comes to your education, your world beliefs, international travel, and essentially how you see your future. And this is because the ninth house is connected to all those things, and it represents seeing the bigger picture. Now, this conjunction will be making a trine to you as a Virgo sun, moon, or rising. Now, of course, it will impact all Virgos across the board, but the ones who will be most impacted will be those who have their sun, moon, or rising at 18 degrees. Now, I will give this a 3 or 4 degree orb for you suns and risings. So if your Virgo sun or rising is from 14 degrees through till 22 degrees, you will still feel this quite strongly. And if your moon is in Virgo, you will definitely feel this even if your moon is anywhere from 10 degrees Virgo through till 26 degrees Virgo. But now let's get into the analysis. The North Node represents developing a new technology, and it represents something which is quite experimental or cutting edge, and it can also have a very polarizing effect and impact on other people. Now, the North Node, otherwise known as Rahu, represents where we can have a sudden rise in terms of our status, and the ninth house is already connected to being an influential individual. Now, Uranus in astrology is connected to new inventions, new technologies, and new innovations, and Mars is also associated with new inventions and engineering. So we need to really unpack what Mars and Uranus rule in your chart. So for you, Virgo, Mars rules over your third house, which represents self-made worth. And the third house is also connected to the internet, writing, reporting, and essentially our communications with other people. It rules over your 8th house as well, which represents conspiracy theories and anything which is hidden and shocking. Now, Uranus in your chart rules over your 6th house, which represents your health, and it represents your daily habits as well as your work environment. So we really need to throw all of these things together and see what comes out. So given that the 9th house is connected to your world beliefs as well as education, many of you Virgos will come across some kind of shocking discovery. Now, you may actually be the mouthpiece for this new finding, and that is because the 9th house represents being a teacher and being a leader, and it also represents preaching. So you may actually find yourself in a position where you are communicating to very large groups of people, as indicated by the planet Uranus. You may be presenting to large groups or large communities, and you may be speaking about things which are considered to be quite taboo, or they may be quite esoteric and occult in nature. And this is represented by the fact that Mars rules over your 8th house. Now, this can actually see you becoming very well known, and somehow you may go viral for your beliefs or for some kind of report or presentation that you put together. And that is indicated not only by the North Node itself, but Uranus represents achieving cult status or going viral. So the combination of these two planets being conjunct one another can essentially see whatever it is that you have discovered, whatever it is that you have presented or developed or are talking about, going viral and reaching a large group of people. Given that Mars rules over your 9th house, which represents social media and technology, if you have put together some kind of report, if you have written a book, or if you have put together a documentary or some kind of expose, or even if you simply have a blog that you thought that no one was really paying attention to, something that you create, something that you write and produce and put together can reach a very large group of people. And like I said, this can have an extremely polarizing impact on other people. Now, given that Uranus rules over your 6th house, which represents the health industry, you may actually be writing about something which pertains to what is going on in the medical world. On a different level, the 9th house in astrology is connected to travel. And because this conjunction is taking place in your 9th house, you may have an opportunity to travel internationally to report on such matters, or to give your advice and share your expertise on whatever kind of groundbreaking knowledge you have stumbled stumbled across. Now, the ninth house in astrology is connected to the law. And like I said, Uranus rules over rebellions and reform. So perhaps you have written some kind of piece, or perhaps you are trying to put together some kind of petition where you are trying to get a law reformed, or maybe you are trying to stop a bill being passed. The ninth house in astrology is connected to good fortune and our good karma. So you may actually have some kind of windfall of abundance take place here. And once again, this will be around the 31st of July, give or take a few days. Because Mars rules over your 8th house, which represents your mutual resources, and this conjunction is occurring in Taurus, which represents wealth, you may receive a large sum of money for your educational teachings, or for work that you are doing as a mentor, or perhaps you are receiving a large sum of money because you are somehow involved in the import and export trade. Now, the ninth house is connected to publishing, so you may actually go viral for a book that you have authored, or for a collection of photographs that you have taken. Like I said, the third house is connected to our writing pieces and media and communications. So with Mars ruling over your third house and ruling over your 8th house, perhaps you are receiving a large sum of money for some kind of communications piece that you have produced. Now, on a different level, the ninth house represents religious ideologies. It represents spirituality and having a spiritual awakening. And because Mars is involved in this conjunction and it rules over the 8th house, which is another spiritual and occult house in astrology, on a more personal level, some of you Virgos may be having some kind of earth-shattering spiritual awakening around this period of time. Now, another way that this can play out is that you may discover that you have some kind of amazing psychic abilities or intuitive abilities, and this is indicated by the fact that Uranus represents divine knowledge and sudden downloads. The ninth house represents prophecy and seeing the bigger picture and seeing our vision of the future. And of course, with Mars being in the mix and ruling over your 8th house, which represents being initiated into some kind of occult practice or occult and divine knowledge, many of you Virgos may end up being some kind of mouthpiece for the divine. And this is also indicated by the fact that Mars rules over your 3rd house, which represents communications. So you don't necessarily need to be speaking directly for your message to reach a large group of people. Even writing projects that you do and communications pieces that you put together can have some kind of nugget of truth or divine wisdom that goes along with it. I just want to say that, this conjunction is extremely exciting for us Virgos because of this trine that it is making to us as Virgo Sun, Moon and Risings. And of course, it is making a trine to your 5th house, which represents deriving joy and pleasure from the simple things in life, and of course from our creative pursuits. Now, because this conjunction involves Uranus, and Uranus rules over your 6th house, which represents your health and your well-being, you may actually have some kind of download of information which allows you to understand what the root cause is of some kind of health ailment or health issue that you have been experiencing. And Mars ruling over your 8th house represents that you may receive some kind of healing or blessing as a result of this conjunction. In any case, Uranus represents things happening suddenly, so I'm actually anticipating that whatever this conjunction brings, it will be pretty close to the date, which once again will be on the 31st of July. Now, on the 20th of August, Mars is going to enter the sign of Gemini, which means that it will be transiting your 10th house. Mars will actually be transiting your 10th house for 7 months. And the reason it's spending so long in Gemini is because it is actually going to retrograde at the end of October, and it will be retrograde until mid-January. So I want you to pay very special attention to whatever you are commencing from the 20th of August through till around the end of October. With Mars being in your 10th house, this will affect those of you who are currently employed. And this is because the 10th house represents our career and our vocation. Now, before I get into it further, even if you are currently unemployed, if you're actually seeking employment, by the end of this Mars in Gemini period, which will be in March next year, I would expect many of you who are looking for a job to be employed by the end of that process. Now, Mars rules over your 3rd house, which is Scorpio, and it rules over your 8th house, which is Aries. So 3rd house and 8th house matters are going to be of very special importance during this 7-month period. So with Mars in your 10th house, it's likely that you are going to take on a new position of leadership, new responsibilities in the workplace. You may have a new title, you may have to work in a new office or in a new department, and in some way, shape, or form, there will be changes to your daily working life, and some of you may actually be starting a new business around this period of time. Now, you may be looking at starting a new communications piece or a new writing piece. You may be starting a new educational course, and on a different level, you may actually be going through the process of combining your mutual resources with another person. On the flip side though, you may be trying to disentangle yourself from this relationship that you have with another person, which has some kind of financial ramifications. Now, with Mars being in the sign of Gemini and in your 10th house, this can very well lead to you trying to change or elevate your position in the corporate world. But this can also have an impact on your one-on-one relationships, which I'm going to speak about later in the horoscope. Now, on the 22nd of August, the Virgo season is going to start. So all of you Virgo Sun, Moon, and Risings are going to be feeling very, very energized during this period of time. So you'll have a lot more energy that you can put towards literally anything. This can be your personal life, your relationships. You can be putting effort and energy into changing your appearance and looking good and feeling good, and you may actually be in the spotlight for some reason this particular month. So Virgo season will last from the 22nd of August through till the 22nd of September, and of course this will always be a big highlight for you every year. Now, from the 5th to the 29th of September, Venus is going to transit the sign of Virgo, which means that it will be in your 1st house. This is always a delightful time of year because when Venus transits our 1st house, we can feel more beautiful, more attractive, we can put more energy into our appearance. Obviously, I said a similar thing with the Sun being in Virgo, but really, once the Sun and Venus are both in Virgo, this is when you're really going to be feeling at your absolute best. And you can absolutely receive lots and lots of compliments during this period of time. And when Venus transits our 1st house, this is when we can actually attract a romantic partner to us. So you may be going out on more dates during this period of time, or perhaps people are simply annoying you a little bit less. Now, on the 9th of September, Mercury is going to station retrograde in the sign of Libra in your 2nd house. Because Mercury rules over your 1st house as well as your 10th house, and the 2nd house in astrology represents your wardrobe and how you dress, I expect that many of you Virgos, probably myself included, will be having a little bit of a makeover. So you may be doing away with old possessions and valuables and, things in your closet that you kind of hate now. On a different level though, if there was a certain style that you used to dress in, going back months or even years, you may bring this back out of the woodwork. So you may have a rediscovered passion for a certain look or for a certain aesthetic. Now, the 2nd house in astrology represents our values and our taste. So your taste in clothing may change, your taste for food may change, and even your preferences when it comes to things like music, and also perfume. Now, the second house in astrology also rules over our diet and what we are eating. And when Mercury is retrograde, this is when we can have a lot of success when it comes to trying to change up our diet or cut out certain foods. And for some of you who used to be vegans, you may return to being a vegan or a vegetarian or some kind of different diet that you used to subscribe to. So with Mercury being retrograde in your second house, it's about finding a new way to solve some kind of problem or issue. So if you've had issues with your diet and maybe you've tried to, for example, cut out certain sugars, or maybe you've tried to stop smoking or stop drinking, or at the very least reduce drinking and smoking, you can have more success with it this time around. Now, the second house in astrology is also connected to our family. So you may be redefining certain relationships with family members. Now, on the 23rd of September, we are going to see Mercury retrograde from Libra back into the sign of Virgo, which means that it will be transiting your first house. When Mercury is retrograde in your first house, and given that it rules over your 10th house, this is when you start rethinking pretty much everything. Now, obviously, this is going to be quite similar to what I mentioned during May when we saw Mercury retrograde in Gemini, but this time around it's going to be a lot more impactful for you because you're going to be changing your approach to life, changing how you carry yourself. You may be changing how you approach other people and new situations. You may make a new set of promises to yourself about what you want to achieve in your career, and you may let go of certain goals or ambitions that you had previously held. When Mercury is retrograde in our first house, this can see us literally changing everything about how we look, how we dress, and how we essentially present ourselves to other people. But the important thing to note is that it will usually be an improvement. So you can essentially see this as you going from how you were before to Virgo 2.0 or 10.0. Depends how many times you guys have reinvented yourselves. In any case, the post-shadow period will last for about a couple of weeks. So after the first week of October, you will well and truly feel like a new and improved version of yourself. Now, on the 2nd of October, Mercury will station direct in the sign of Virgo in your first house. Then on the 25th of October, we are going to see the new moon solar eclipse in Scorpio take place. This eclipse will be at 2 degrees Scorpio, and it will actually be in exact conjunction with Venus at 2 degrees. Now, of course, we also need to look at what the ruler of the eclipse is doing, and in this case, it will be Mars in Gemini in your 10th house. New moon eclipses indicate a new chapter or a new beginning starting somewhere in our lives, and usually there is some kind of catalyst or event that takes place which propels us forth in wanting this new chapter to begin. So because this is occurring in your 3rd house, I expect that many of you Virgos will be starting some kind of new education course or apprenticeship. You may start writing a new book, or you may put together a documentary or some kind of expose, or you could be looking at learning a new language or mastering some kind of new skill or talent. The 3rd house represents business connections, friends, siblings, and relatives. So you may be forming a new relationship with another individual. Now, if you are making new connections with other individuals and you're wanting to go into business with them, you can actually have a successful working relationship together. And this is indicated by the fact that Mars is the ruler of this eclipse, and Mars rules over your 8th house, which represents your mutual resources. And because this eclipse is conjunct Venus, which rules over your 2nd house of finances and resources, whatever new thing you are starting in your life, it can eventually turn a profit. Now, with new moon eclipses, it's not necessarily about everything being put together within a matter of a couple of days. Sometimes there will just be like an event that takes place, like I said before, or you may make the initial introduction to another person, or you may meet someone for the first time, or there may just be a conversation which occurs in passing, but you may not pick this up until maybe 3 or 6 months down the track. In any case, I see this new moon solar eclipse in your third house as you basically seeing that you have more options when it comes to business opportunities and your career. And this will certainly play a part later when we have Mars being in retrograde. Now, on the 28th of October, we are going to see Jupiter re-enter the sign of Pisces in your 7th house. So it will be having its last little hurrah here for 2 months until another 12 or 13 years. So with Jupiter here in your 7th house, this can see you tying up loose ends with certain relationships. You may be revisiting these business opportunities or these collaborative opportunities that were discussed previously. Now, this could be a relationship that took place or a conversation that took place between, the beginning of the year and around the start of May in 2022, or this could even go back to mid-May through to July 2021. In any case, Jupiter will only be retrograde at about 29, 28, or even 27 degrees for the last 2 months. So the Virgos who will be most impacted by this will be any Virgo Sun, Moon, or Rising who is at 27, 28, or 29 degrees. Now, on the 29th of October, we are going to see Mercury enter the sign of Scorpio, which means that it will be transiting your third house. And this will be important because we're going to see Mars station retrograde in Gemini the very next day, which means that Mercury and Mars will be working in tandem with one another. And this is because they will be in mutual reception. Mutual receptions occur when two planets are in each other's ruling signs. So what I mean by this is Mars is in Gemini, Mercury is in Scorpio, Mercury rules Gemini, and Mars rules Scorpio. So you can see that they are actually sharing an agenda and they are motivated by the same thing here. If you didn't understand that, if it was too complicated, all I'm saying is that this is a good thing. So with Mars being retrograde in your 10th house, we now want to look back to whatever you started around the 20th of August through to, any time in October. Of course, the 10th house represents our life purpose, it represents our career and our public persona and our public reputation. Mars rules over your 3rd house and it rules over your 8th house, which will become very important as this analysis goes on. When we have Mars being retrograde in our 10th house, it represents there being a status change here. And this is actually emphasized by the fact that Mars rules over your 8th house, and the 8th house in astrology is connected to sudden reversals. So this can see your status in terms of how society perceives you, how you refer to yourself, and of course your personal relationships being impacted. So a 10th house activation can sound like any of the following: becoming a parent for the first time, becoming a grandparent for the first time, getting into a new relationship, getting married, getting divorced, or breaking up. It essentially impacts us when it comes to how society would refer to us. So if you are someone's husband, or if you are someone's parent or someone's grandparent or someone's employee, or if you are self-employed, all these, titles that we give other people and that we give ourselves and that other people use to refer to us as, this is all indicated by 10th house activations. Now, on the career front, this can see you taking on some kind of enormous project. And again, this will be dating back to around the 20th of August, through to September, October. And when Mars is retrograde, it represents us needing to put in 3 times more effort, if not more, to overcome some kind of obstacle or challenge or setback. And there will be setbacks. Let me just say that to you straight up. If you are working, there is going to be some kind of monster project or challenge that you need to overcome. Now, this doesn't need to be a bad thing. It could be that you initiated this project to yourself, or you said yes to it, or you started your own business. And this is indicated by Mars ruling over your 3rd house. And now you're like, oh my God, I have so much work to do. Things are going wrong, or this is so much more work than I thought, or I don't have the money to fund this project. In any case, Mars retrograde periods are actually a great opportunity for you to start some kind of project, for you to exercise your willpower, start something new, learn something new, create something new, and then you can go in and tweak it, change it, redevelop it. You may need to pivot. You may be changing up your whole business plan. You may have to move your resources around or your finances around in order to get this off the ground. And I'm saying this because Mars rules over your 8th house, which represents your mutual resources. So you may have to lean on other people for support, or money that you thought was coming in may be delayed in some way, shape, or form. Ultimately, Mars being retrograde in your 10th house from the 30th of October through to the 12th of January indicates that come mid-January, you will actually see that your public reputation and how society views you will totally transform for the better. Now, because Mars rules over your 8th house, which represents that which is hidden or secretive, and it represents conspiracy theories, and Mars also rules over your 3rd house, which represents blogs, writing pieces, documentaries, reports, and writing books, and so on and so forth. You may be writing or producing some kind of communications piece, which is essentially an expose. And this is also supported by the fact that Mercury will be in the sign of Scorpio, which means that it will be in your 3rd house. When Mercury is in Scorpio, this is when we are essentially able to focus our minds like nothing else, because Mercury represents how we are directing our thoughts and what we are focusing our attention on. And Scorpio represents having drive and ambition. And of course, Scorpio is a very intuitive sign and a psychological sign. Oh, as I said that, my candle went out. And right now, as I'm filming this, Mercury is actually in Scorpio. Nonetheless, though, with Mercury being in Scorpio for the first 3 weeks of Mars being retrograde, essentially, you may uncover some kind of buried information. Mercury in Scorpio is my private investigator placement for you guys. So if you have natal Mercury in Scorpio, you guys just have this way of ferreting out information. And even if you don't, it doesn't matter because we're Virgos. Nonetheless, though, with Mercury being in Scorpio and Mars being in Gemini, you will be able to focus your attention and your willpower to achieve something which is truly incredible, which is going to have a very, very positive impact on how society views you and your public reputation as a whole. Now, on the 8th of November, there will be a total lunar eclipse at 16 degrees Taurus, and it will be in exact conjunction with Uranus. This eclipse will actually be opposed by Venus and Mercury in Scorpio, and it will all be making a T-square to Saturn in Aquarius in your 6th house. Now, lunar eclipses are about letting go of something or experiencing liberation from a certain situation. Now, given that this will be occurring in your 9th house, which is connected to our sense of freedom and seeing the bigger picture, and it will be conjunct Uranus, which is also associated with liberation and freedom. Although these aspects that are being formed are very tense, I actually see this as being such an incredible moment for spiritual, emotional, and physical liberation for you. And that is because Uranus rules over your 6th house, which represents your health. And the 6th house represents where we have to be of service to other people. Now, this may be voluntary or this may be something which you are unwilling to do. In any case, though, the fact that the eclipse is conjunct Uranus shows some kind of spontaneous liberation and a severing of ties. And this represents your commitments to the workplace that you are in, or to a conflictual situation which is out of balance. The 6th house represents our enemies. So with this eclipse being conjunct Uranus, I actually see Virgos as being divorced from some kind of unpleasant and conflictual situation. And if there is someone in your life who you feel is out to get you or who basically has it in for you, this can see you actually escaping this situation and being liberated from it once and for all. Now, because this eclipse is making an opposition to Venus and Mercury, we need to look at how Venus and Mercury are impacting your chart. Venus rules over your second house, which represents your finances and your resources. So some of you may have felt bound to another person for financial reasons. Maybe you were receiving resources from them or utilities from them or even money from them. And what I mean by that is if you weren't straight up receiving cash, maybe they, told you that they were going to give you certain resources or certain benefits, or maybe you were able to, use some of their resources or use their utilities for free. Now, because Venus rules over your ninth house and it is the ruler of this eclipse, the fact that it is opposed to the eclipse indicates that however this eclipse is presenting an ending in your life or the close of a chapter, this is likely to involve your relationship with another person, and that is indicated by the opposition, and also Venus represents relationships as it is. Now, Venus rules over your ninth house, so maybe you are feeling as though you are liberated from your father and the hold that he had over you, or this could be from a father figure. Now, it could be deeper than that, and it may not involve other people. Venus rules over your ninth house, so maybe you grew up with a certain set of religious ideologies, and even though you logically or spiritually don't feel a connection to these beliefs, you may have still felt as though there was a higher power watching over you. So what comes to mind here is people who were raised in fear of, an almighty God who would punish them if they took a wrong turn. And even if you are like an atheist now or you're spiritual, oh my God, my other candle went out as I said that. Oh, you guys, I just feel really strongly that a lot of you Virgos have been living with this sense of oppression, really, that you can't act a certain way or behave a certain way because you're worried about what other people are going to think of you, or you're worried about how this is going to make you look in the public eye. In any case, with Uranus ruling over your sixth house, this can just indicate that this total lunar eclipse is allowing you to actually go forth and pursue what it is that you want to do for work and live your life how you want to live it. And the sixth house represents our daily habits. So for those of you who have been struggling with certain compulsions or certain habits, you may actually experience a divorce from this compulsive need to fulfill certain rituals, and this is something which affects a lot of Virgos, of course, but if you have certain rituals which you feel that you have to perform and these are showing up as compulsions, like maybe you are knocking on things, or like you have to count numbers or rearrange things, and you are quite anal retentive about how things are in your home, this can see you actually loosening up a little bit and letting go of some of these self-limiting behaviors. And I'm not casting judgment, this is only if you feel like this has been impeding your ability to maybe work with other people, or if this has been having a negative impact on your health. Just remember that this opposition from the eclipse to Mercury and Venus in your third house represents you having a total shift in terms of your perspective. So, Virgos, I do see this as being very liberating. And with this square to Saturn in Aquarius in your sixth house, this is about you actually being able to break with certain traditions or break with certain routines which have been having a very negative impact on your life. Now, on the 16th of November, we are going to see Venus enter the sign of Sagittarius, which means that it will be transiting your fourth house. So this is a great period of time for you to enjoy time at home, to potentially look at buying a house, okay, because Venus rules over your second house, which represents your finances and your resources. So you may actually be purchasing another property or signing on a new lease. And this is a great period of time for you to really just enjoy, spending time with a family or spending time at home. Now, on the 9th of December, we are going to see Venus enter the sign of Capricorn, which means that it will be transiting your 5th house. When Venus is in our 5th house, this is when we can enjoy holidays and vacations, or we can feel more creative. You may be looking at starting a new hobby. And for those of you who are in a relationship, this is a great period of time for you and your partner to spice things back up in your relationship or go on more dates. And for those of you who are single and looking, this is such a good period of time for you to meet someone. So make sure that if you are wanting to meet someone special, that you are saying yes to invitations to go out to parties and events. And the 5th house represents where we can meet someone, and it also represents sporting stadiums and events. It represents casinos, restaurants, bars, clubs, and literally, anything that you would do which is fun and recreational. Now, on the 20th of December, we are going to see Jupiter re-enter the sign of Aries, which means that it will be in your 8th house. This will be an opportunity for you to reap the rewards of whatever you commenced between May 10th through till the end of July, when we saw Jupiter being direct in the sign of Aries. So, you can see an increase in your mutual resources. You may actually be receiving an inheritance around this time, or your significant other or business partner may receive an increase in their mutual resources. And so, Virgo, that's all I have for you for 2022. I really hope you enjoyed this yearly horoscope. Please take care of yourselves for the year ahead, and I will see you guys next time.